The town of Eldenwood was a place where time seemed to stand still. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, it was a town of cobblestone streets, flickering gas lamps, and whispers of old magic. But the heart of Eldenwood wasn't its quaint charm or its eerie silence. It was the clockmaker's shop at the end of Maple Lane. The shop belonged to Elias Hart, a man as enigmatic as the clocks he crafted. His creations were no ordinary timepieces. They were intricate, almost alive, with gears that hummed like whispers and hands that moved with a purpose. People said Elias's clocks could tell more than just time. They could tell secrets, predict futures, and even mend broken hearts. But Elias himself was a mystery. He rarely spoke, his piercing gray eyes always distant, as if he were listening to a rhythm no one else could hear. Elias's life was a solitary one, filled with the ticking of clocks and the occasional visit from curious townsfolk. But everything changed the day she walked into his shop. Her name was Lila. She arrived on a stormy evening, the kind where the wind howled like a wounded animal, and the rain lashed against the windows like tiny daggers. The bell above the door jingled softly as she stepped inside, her dark hair plastered to her face, her dress clinging to her slender frame. She looked like a ghost, pale and trembling, but her eyes were alive, burning with a desperate intensity. "I need your help," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias looked up from his workbench, his heart skipping a beat. He had seen many faces in his shop, but none like hers. There was something about her, something that made the air around her crackle with energy. "What do you need?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Lila hesitated, her gaze darting around the room, taking in the countless clocks that lined the walls. Each one was unique, with its own story, its own soul. She seemed to sense their presence, as if they were watching her, waiting. "I need a clock," she said finally. "A special one." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Special how?" Lila stepped closer, her eyes locking onto his. "I need a clock that can stop time." The request hung in the air like a heavy fog, thick and suffocating. Elias had heard many strange requests in his years as a clockmaker, but this was different. Stopping time wasn't just impossible, it was dangerous. Time was a force that couldn't be controlled, only respected. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lila's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, she looked like a lost child. "Because I'm running out of it," she said, "and I'm not ready to say goodbye." Elias felt a pang in his chest, a deep, aching sorrow that he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know her story, but he could see the pain in her eyes, the desperation in her voice. And for the first time in his life, he wanted to help someone, not because they asked, but because he couldn't bear to see them suffer. "I'll try," he said, though he knew the risks. "But it won't be easy." Lila nodded, a small, grateful smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you." Days turned into weeks as Elias worked tirelessly on the clock. He poured everything he had into it, his skill, his passion, even a piece of his soul. The clock was unlike anything he had ever made, with gears that glowed like embers and hands that moved in reverse. It was beautiful, haunting, and utterly unpredictable. But as the clock neared completion, strange things began to happen. The other clocks in the shop started behaving erratically, their hands spinning wildly, their chimes ringing out of sync. The air grew heavy, charged with an energy that made Elias's skin crawl. And then there were the dreams, vivid, unsettling dreams of Lila, her face pale and lifeless, her eyes staring into the void. Elias tried to ignore the signs, to convince himself that it was just his imagination. But deep down, he knew the truth. The clock was more than just a machine. It was a gateway, a bridge between worlds, and he was playing with forces he didn't fully understand. The night the clock was finished, Lila returned. She looked different, paler, thinner, as if the life was slowly draining out of her, but her eyes were still the same, burning with that same desperate intensity. "Is it ready?" she asked, her voice trembling. Elias nodded, though his heart was heavy with doubt. "It's ready, but are you sure about this? Once it starts, there's no turning back." Lila hesitated, her gaze falling on the clock. It was beautiful, but there was something unsettling about it, something that made her stomach churn. "I have to try," she said finally. "For him." Elias frowned. For who? But Lila didn't answer. Instead, she reached out and touched the clock, her fingers brushing against the glowing gears. And then the world stopped. The air grew still, the ticking of the clocks fading into silence. Elias felt a coldness seep into his bones, a numbness that spread through his body like poison. He tried to move, to speak, but he was frozen, trapped in a moment that stretched on forever. And then he saw it, a figure emerging from the shadows, tall and gaunt, with eyes like black holes, and a smile that made Elias's blood run cold. "You shouldn't have done that," the figure said, its voice echoing in the silence. Elias wanted to scream, to run, but he couldn't. He could only watch as the figure approached Lila, its hand reaching out to touch her. And then, just as suddenly as it had stopped, time started again. Elias woke up on the floor of his shop, his head pounding, his body aching. The clock was gone, shattered into 1,000 pieces, and Lila was nowhere to be found. He searched for her, desperate to know what had happened, but no one in Eldenwood had seen her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only a faint trace of her presence, a single, delicate gear from the clock, still glowing faintly. Elias never spoke of that night, not to anyone, but he kept the gear, a reminder of the love that never ticked, the love that was lost to time. And though he continued to make clocks, he never again tried to stop time, because he knew now that some things were better left untouched, some mysteries better left unsolved. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howled and the rain lashed against the windows, he would hear it, a faint, almost imperceptible ticking, like a heartbeat echoing from another world, and he would wonder if Lila had found what she was looking for, or if she was still out there, lost in the endless expanse of time. The clockmaker's shop still stands at the end of Maple Lane, its windows dark, its doors locked. But if you listen closely, you might hear it, the faint, haunting sound of a clock that never ticks, a love that never dies. And you might wonder, as Elias did, if some stories are better left untold. Thanks for watching, my love. Hope you will enjoy the story. Please like and subscribe for next one.